Dexerto on X. A rumored PS5 jailbreak method has caused Star Wars Racer Revenge to go from $50 to almost $500. The reason is down to the fact that the physical copy of the limited edition game is the key for hackers to study the console's core software. So this has happened previously with other games where access was granted. I believe PlayStation 3, there was a game, I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, that you could utilize to hack the system by loading it and then stopping loading it and glitching it and then getting into the kernel and being able to access the root and change system settings and stuff like that. So apparently it was discovered that the Star Wars Racer Revenge game, that's a limited run game, is a game that can do that for the PlayStation 5 and is a massive, massive breakthrough for the hacking community. The Exerto says no public jailbreak tool has been released and the method remains unverified, with Sony not yet commenting on the ROM keys leak. So the ROM keys leak was a big story the other day. And if this is true, it means that the PlayStation 5 could theoretically be jailbroken and hacked on top of the PlayStation Network hacks too. A new PS5 jailbreak method is gaining traction for an unusual reason. It reportedly only works if a player owns a physical copy of a Star Wars game. The claim follows the PS5 ROM key leak that surfaced on December 31st, which reportedly allowed hackers to study the console's core software in far greater detail and look for weaknesses that were previously hidden. So those PS5 ROM keys were reportedly leaked out in the open, unrelated to this game. And now that they have those keys, they're using this game to access it further. As highlighted by Twisted Voxel, the discovery has fed into new jailbreak theories, including one tied to how the PS5 handles certain PS4 discs. For those unfamiliar, jailbreaking a PS5 means bypassing Sony's software restrictions to run unofficial apps or access parts of the system that are normally locked down, though doing so can carry risks and break Sony's terms of service, which of course it does. The probably most famous hacked system, at least in my life, was the original Nintendo Wii, and just how easy, once it got hacked, it was for any person to download and utilize that. It turned the Wii into a ROM emulator paradise. It was amazing. And I'm surprised more people these days just don't get Wiis when they're talking about playing retro games on the TV, because that thing was so capable. It was incredible. PS5 exploit sparks $500 Star Wars game eBay listings. According to reports, the exploit does not rely on the game's content itself. Instead, it targets the PS5's disk authentication and mounting process used for backward compatibility, which again, I believe that's the same thing that was happening with the PS3 situation years ago with the game that they were using for that. The method is said to rely specifically on the PS4 disc version of Racer Revenge, which runs through a separate system layer that is not accessed by digital copies. Because of this, the current eBay listings show the game jumping from around $50 to as high as $500 as resellers rush to cash in on the newly discovered exploit. If I had this game, I would immediately put it up to eBay. I'd be like, yep, sure. Because what always happens with this is it goes for a shitload of money right away. And then as the months go by, no one cares about it, and it starts getting right back to cheaper again. This isn't the first time PlayStation Quirk has driven prices sky high, as PS4 consoles still carried PT installed, famously sold at a premium after the demo was pulled from the PlayStation Store. At the time of writing, no public jailbreak tool has been released, and the method remains unverified outside of scene discussions. Sony also has not publicly commented on the ROM keys leak or the reports surrounding the exploit. Nor are they going to, by the way, because they don't want to give this any more legs than it already has. This is one of those things they just got to ignore and hope that it just disappears, because anything they say can and will be used against them in the court of hackers trying to find out information and legitimizing what they're doing right now. So I brought up the eBay listings of Star Wars Racer Revenge right now. These are the sold listings just in the past 24 hours. Sold $240 plus $5 delivery. $200 sold, $245 sold. This is, I mean, it's going for about $2 to $250. This one confirmed sale for $411. That's crazy. That is classic. And I'm sure right now that Sony proper is working vigorously to try to figure out the exploit and patch it. I'm sure they are. So right now it's a race against time with who can figure out the exploit first and utilize it before it gets patched. But my God, this is crazy. Pirate Nation Onyx. Physical copies of largely forgotten Star Wars racing game are selling for hundreds on eBay following reports that the title allows you to jailbreak the PS5. One Jailbreak says, I cover this in detail here for everyone interested in the PS5 jailbreak. It's a PS5 12.00 jailbreak coming with mastic or exploit chain. A new development in the PlayStation hacking scene proves that a jailbreak for PS5 firmware achievable using mastic or based game exploits by Genzine, marking the first credible userland entry point identified for this firmware range. And one thing I've learned about hacking when it comes to video games is it's only a matter of time. Everything starts out unhackable, and then people find a way through. The breakthrough centers on a PlayStation 2 emulated title that can trigger mastic or's exploit chain, allowing code execution from crafted save file. This addresses a key limitation that has stalled progress on higher PS5 firmware versions. While a kernel exploit already exists in firmware up to 12.0, it could not be reliably triggered without a compatible userland exploit. Until now, available entry points were either outdated or impractical. Public WebKit exploits stop at much earlier firmware, and the publicly released Blu-ray exploit only works up to firmware 7.6. Massacre, which escapes the PS2 emulator used by modern PlayStation systems, remained the only viable option. But it was previously tied to a single digital-only title that had to have been purchased before Sony removed it or updated it. That situation changed this week when Genzine demonstrated Massacre running on a PlayStation 5 through a physical PlayStation 2 Classics disc release. Okay, so it's a PlayStation 2 Classics game that was released on the PlayStation 4 being put into the PlayStation 5 backward compatibility for the PlayStation 4 playing a PlayStation 2 game. You with me still? The title identified as Star Wars Racer Revenge, part of a limited batch of PlayStation 2 games released on disc for PS4 and playable on PS5 through backward compatibility. Because the game is disc-based and firmware agnostic, it could be used as an entry point on PS5 systems running firmware 12.0. Once triggered, the exploit provides userland execution, which can then be chained with the existing kernel vulnerability, commonly referred to in the scene as the poop exploit. Together, the two components form a complete jailbreak path for firmware 12.0, something that has not been publicly achievable before. The downside is availability. Physical copies of Star Wars Racer's Revenge were already limited before the disclosure. Since the news broke, resale prices have surged sharply, with listings climbing to the hundreds of euros. Genzine has warned users not to buy other PS2 Classic discs in hopes that they work, noting that porting Massacre to additional titles is complex and not currently planned. For now, this approach is mainly of interest to researchers and early adopters. Existing jailbreak methods for lower PS5 firmware versions, including media-based exploits, remain far more accessible. On PS4, the development has little practical impact as newer and simpler jailbreak options already exist for higher firmware. Separately, developers have also pushed back on speculation that recently published PS5 ROM key information would immediately lead to full system compromise. Security researchers note that the keys alone are not sufficient without additional hardware-specific data or exploitable flaws in the boot ROM. Massacre-based entry point does not mean a public one-click PS5 jailbreak is imminent. Still, it represents the first concrete path forward for firmware 12.0 and confirms that higher version exploitation is no longer theoretical. Well, that was a banger post by Kuba Pollock. So shout out to them. I think the funny part about this is there's probably people buying the game thinking that they're going to be able to use it in order to hack their PlayStation 5 by being able to boot it up and maybe download a one-click solution. They're not there yet. So I'd venture to guess there's a lot of people buying this, jumping in on it, thinking that they're going to need this to access that. Maybe someday that'll be the case, but maybe in other cases, you won't need this game by the point that they get to that point. So there's probably a lot of people just jumping on the, I want to get this game because everyone else is getting it too, bandwaiting. So I wonder what's going to happen with this as far as the future of the PlayStation 5 hacking scene. It sounds like a major exploit was found, and this is just the beginning. And I'll report back as soon as we have a bigger update. But for now, I'll leave that one right there.